Hey guys, it's Oluvids, and within the past couple of months, I finally sat down and played Persona 3 and 4 after playing Persona 5 a couple years ago. Now that I've played all the modern Personas, I have a better understanding on how the series is. In terms of JRPGs I've played so far, I wouldn't put the series any higher than a B. The reason for that is because it's missing a lot of the fundamental things I even like and expect from JRPGs. I'm going to go through some of the different aspects I usually look for and where Persona falls short for me. And I also want to touch on the life sim part of the game later on. Anyway, I just want to get out the way that Persona absolutely nails the music and UI. Persona 5 in particular is visually insanely good. It's just a really cool looking and stylish game, and even things like the regular attack animation just looks really cool. The music is top notch for JRPG standards, or even just compared to any video game genre. Alright, so the first place where I think it isn't really going as far as I'd like is with the worlds you live in. Usually, as you know, there's a normal world, and then there's the otherworldly place to explore and fight shadows in. In JRPGs, one of the most exciting parts about starting a new one is getting settled into the world the game takes place in. In old school games, a lot of the time you'd end up exploring every continent on the planet and seeing all the different towns and kingdoms with different groups of people. In things like Pokemon or something newer like SMT5, you explore maybe just one city or region. In Pokemon's case, even with just one region, it has enough variety in each town and so many different characters to me that feels like a satisfying adventure. Especially in some of the newer ones where they integrate real-world cultures into these regions. It's cool to see how each region does things a little bit differently from the others. Anyway, in Persona, honestly, I never really felt a sense of getting immersed into the new setting. In terms of the JRPG side of Persona, you only ever have dungeons, and the dungeons don't have much life going on inside of them. In Persona 3 and 4, it's just you, your enemies, and a bunch of corridors, which is pretty disappointing. In Persona 5, you do have some more elaborate dungeons that have some NPCs sometimes. The Persona 5 palaces, I guess, are like if you took a dungeon and fused it with a castle or a town, in the sense that each palace has its own way that the leader runs things, with the fake cognition people as the subjects. After the first palace, however, there's not really much of a sense of exploring a new world since you already know what each palace is already, which is the cognition of your target. The NPCs aren't real either, so you won't really meet new people or learn about a new culture or anything like that. There is often a truth to learn about these other worlds in Persona, whether it's a backstory involving a lab experiment, or the world being influenced by people's thoughts or curiosity, or being influenced by the collective society's desires or mental state. It's just that there's usually not too much time spent on that till the end. And, you know, it does make sense since the party's main focus is usually more personal than all the big picture stuff going on. But I think personally, I'd really enjoy if they took an SMT5 approach to its level design. They could have some open zones in the world inhabited by shadows. Think of like how Persona 5, when you're outside of a palace, there's technically a whole world out there that you can't explore. I think it would be cool if instead of being placed right outside the palace, you have to make your way through the world and eventually find it. As you explore the world, you can learn more about said other world from shadows that aren't close enough to the palace to be under a human's control. That way you can start to piece together the secret of the other world and why it's connecting your world gradually through clues and dialogue instead of just having nothing till the very end. And just in general, you could get the satisfaction of seeing how shadows live in an undisturbed habitat, while still having your classic dungeons at the end. Now, there is a second world you have in the Persona games in terms of 3, 4, and 5. You got Tatsumi Port Island, Inaba, and Tokyo. Now, in the regular life sections of these games, you usually go to school, hang out with friends, work part-time jobs, or just do other activities to boost your social stats. Persona 4 is a game where I got the best sense of what Inaba is like and the people who live there. In general, I think it's the best location of the 3 games I've played. Tatsumi Port Island I'm kinda neutral on. It should be said that I played portable, so it's not as immersive as 4 and 5 just because of that. There's lots of NPCs to talk to though, and there's some variety here and there around the island. Persona 5 is honestly the most disappointing one. During this time of gathering my thoughts on Persona 5 after playing 3 and 4, I've always wondered why it never fully clicked in my head that you go to places like Shibuya or Shinjuku. Walking around in Shibuya in The Realms with You sticks in my head a lot more, and I learned more about the culture and the city life in that game. And then when I went back to Persona 5 to walk around the city, I got hit with the unfortunate part of the level design. These hubs are pretty bare bones, and they cut off all the interesting parts of the city with invisible walls. Like, what do you mean I can't walk across Scramble Crossing or see the 104 building? At most, you can see Hachiko, but that's really it. They have the train station with a cool underground mall in there, but a lot of these locations in P5 is just some random side streets. Okay, technically maybe bare bones isn't the right word to use, because they have a lot of things packed into these places, but they missed a big opportunity to let you be a tourist and immerse yourself in these famous Japanese cities. I mean, like, even in lore in these Persona games, you're moving into a new place rather than being a local. With the more powerful technology, surely they could have given us some more than this. Anyway, in all 3 of these games, I will say that going around the real world is pretty repetitive. And honestly, I mean, sure, that's realistic. I mean, you don't go halfway across the country every Tuesday. Truth be told, I think if the metaphysical worlds were more interesting, then these worlds could probably stay as simple as they are. But yeah, as it is now, I find more fulfillment in exploring and learning about the world of an NES JRPG than what Persona has to offer. Now, before we get into the next section, I want to just take a quick tangent to talk about my thoughts on the battle system. I think in Persona 5 they nailed it. In terms of 3 and 4, I don't actually like how the battles played out with having less options for improvising compared to P5. Things like being forced to wait for your buffs to run out, rather than getting into a situation where you can weigh out your options and decide between reinforcing your stats early or risking it for the sake of getting some more damage in. The Persona series in general has a good amount of customization though, with the different personas you can fuse and the skills you can give them. Overall, the system isn't as fun as something like the press turn system from SMT, but I think Persona 5 specifically is pretty fun battle-wise, thanks to baton pass and character switching. Alright, so this whole video is pretty subjective, and this part's going to be the same. Just putting that out there because I know these games very much do reach people, and it hits different for them. Now, that being said, let's talk about the stories of these games. Technically, I do actually like the Persona stories. The only issue is just how the story is presented compared to other JRPGs. Alright, so for Persona 3, I do like how the characters grow throughout the game more naturally than 4 and 5. You know, I like the whole theme of living your life to the fullest with the time you have and really thinking about your future rather than blindly only caring about the present. The problem for me in Persona 3 is that all this stuff comes in way too late in the game, and the characters don't really get too much to work with until later on. I was actually extremely bored with the game for a big chunk of it, and I genuinely thought the main characters just didn't have social links. I think I would have appreciated if maybe the characters had some mini arcs before the big character shifts in development later on. I also want to say that the social links I think were decent, but again, not good enough to carry the lack of character work going on for a big chunk of the game. Though I do like the sun. That one's a really good one. That one's like genuinely really good. Anyway, for Persona 4, I think the game relied too much on social links as a crutch to give its party members some screen time. Unfortunately, I mean, those are optional. You can end up missing stuff, and it won't have any payoff in the story. And even then, you know, I actually liked the non-party member links more than the ones for the main characters. Like I say, these non-party member links were much better than the ones I saw in Persona 3. Also, I think in general for the main story, it didn't have enough slice of life stuff going on. Parts like Mystery Food X or eating watermelons were actually my favorite parts of the game. I also really liked the really long intro, by the way, too. Like, again, when it's just like getting you settled into the environment and just seeing what their life is like, that's my favorite parts of the game. And in terms of the murder mystery, I wasn't really too big of a fan of that. Granted, it's not the game's fault that I already knew about Adachi, because, you know, it's more like the internet's fault. I already saw that. Everyone likes to talk about Adachi and show how he's the killer. Anyway, just in general, there wasn't really a lot of progress made in the investigation until way later, so this wasn't a case of me getting hooked into the buildup of something, despite already knowing the end of it. Though luckily, people don't really talk much about Namatame, and I actually really like that section. I don't really like the dungeons in Persona 4, though. I mean, it's really formulaic, and the characters don't even get that much screen time in their own dungeons. Like, the problems the characters have are actually good subject matters, it's just like, I don't like how it's executed. In terms of Persona 5, there's a lot of cutscenes, and that might be a bad thing for some people. Not for me, though. The more screen time these guys got, the better, in my opinion. I felt satisfied after each character's story arc. But I will say, there isn't much nuance in terms of different villains that's there. Like, there's no point where it would be like, huh, I mean, Kamoshi was wrong, but I mean, yeah, there's a point. Like, no, all the villains in the game are pretty evil and you gotta take them down. I do want to add, though, that I only played the regular Persona 5, but the Maruki arc does look like it has more nuance in terms of the villain's goal. I do think it's good, though, that the Phantom Thieves still have to prove if they're just, because the public's opinion kind of sways on them a bit. The game also does show how people in power like Shido can get away with murder. Now, it doesn't really have realistic solutions to each of these character struggles, and I mean, these character struggles are so extreme, they might not be as relatable as the earlier games. But to me, Persona 5's story is just more engaging throughout the whole thing, rather than only getting good towards the end. Overall, I think 3 and 4 have stronger characters, but 5 has better storytelling and screen time for the cast. One could argue that maybe Persona does give more time to the main party than other JRPGs. And, you know, sure, like let's say someone like Charla from Xenoblade Chronicles doesn't have the most amount of screen time put to her. But usually these games also have a really good main character, who does get a lot of character work for the entire thing. Characters like Cloud Strife, Rex and Pyra, Tidus, Yuna, Neku, or Sora. I feel like a lot of the time the Persona Protags aren't really bringing that much to the table when you're going by what's in the game. Like, the anime definitely defines them, and it seems like the fandom uses that on their perception of them, but really half the time, Persona Protags are just kind of standing around with their hands in their pocket. Usually only in the beginning and the end do they really get some stuff to work with. Though inherently part of the point of Persona is that you can customize them and characterize them with the things you do in the game. In Persona 3 at least, you can customize how they act in battle, since you can choose what type of weapon they use. Granted, that wasn't in the version I played, but you know, I just had to put that out there at least. I think SMT though does handle the silent self-insert protag a little bit better though, since the actions you take will affect your alignment and can lead to different outcomes in the end. Now, I mean, it's definitely nowhere near as open as something like Baldur's Gate 3, but there's at least some quests where you can choose to ally yourself and fight the other side in terms of different conflicts. Now, I can say that Persona 4 at the very least does have sections where your ending can change depending on certain dialogue choices you make. And this is in the Namatame section, by the way, which is why I'm saying I really like this section. And you know, usually in Persona, you just pick between the obvious good thing or the obvious bad thing. But that section had me resetting a bunch to get the ending I wanted. Anyway, I want to make a small tangent again to talk about silent protags. My favorite one at the moment is probably Dragon Quest XI's hero. It might just be because you can see his facial expressions often, or that he has a defined backstory that unfolds as you go throughout the game. Like, the Persona protags at least have some dialogue, and 11 straight up just doesn't say anything, but for some reason I gravitate towards him more than the Persona guys. Maybe him not having dialogue is actually what makes it easier to insert myself. Also, I actually kind of find it easier to insert myself into Pokemon protags too. I guess that mainly applies to the 2D games since you can't see their facial expressions. So I think you kind of just fill it in for yourself. You can also express yourself through the team that you crafted and raised in Pokemon. There's also the fact that you're by yourself for the majority of the game, so it does feel like it's really your adventure at the end of the day. Alright, now a lot of the video has been comparing Persona to other JRPGs I like. Mostly my preference, but hey, maybe it would be wrong for Persona to become more like a regular JRPG in terms of the scope of the world, or maybe it'd be wrong to change how they handle their protags. Persona should mainly be about living your life throughout the year and making bonds, except in my opinion it doesn't really do that well either. Majority of the time you're doing that in social links that can't ever inform future actions in the story or have any payoff. I want more downtime in between these JRPG sections. I want more time for the characters to just live, not just helping them out with a problem and then never hanging out with them ever again. I want to flesh out their school life, and until Persona 5, they don't really even use the school that much for the story. I also want to see what their home life is like, or we can have the gang meet up and go to each other's houses from time to time, or maybe we can meet their parents, or have some comedic memories to remember at school, or even some drama between the different characters. We'd have some parties, or we can go to a friend's birthday party, or try to think of a gift to give them at school. And actually, now that I think about it, when are any of these Persona characters' birthdays? I don't think they ever even acknowledge times like that. I mean, you could even have school days that are pretty uneventful, but then you and your friends could joke around and find ways to pass time in class. Even if you include the party social links as info, I don't think they even give you that much on these guys' lives, just one single problem for each of them. I think the non-main character links could be better. Some of them are worth spending their time on, but most of them feel like they're way too simple for the amount of time you have to put in. I'd prefer that they made more simpler stories that got condensed into maybe 3 ranks each, and then some of those maybe not as good characters can have 3 storylines, with a 10th rank working as a conclusion for all 3 of them. That way you can at least look forward to what will happen next in these people's lives, rather than just waiting for the conclusion of what you started. It would also keep it at 10 stages for the social link, so that you can keep the mechanic of, you know, the XP boost for fusions and all that. Anyway, to wrap this up, I haven't played any other life sim games or visual novels, but I can't shake the feeling that surely this isn't the peak of the genre. Like, really, if you guys know some good ones, let me know. What I can say for sure though is that the JRPG part of it falls short compared to other ones I've played. Granted, what I find lacking, some might find refreshing. Like, they might find it refreshing, for example, that's not a globe-trotting grand adventure like most other JRPGs. I know people definitely love the themes and characters. I do like the themes of these games. I'm not super passionate about the characters though. At the end of the day, it's really about the execution and pacing for me. On paper, this should all work. The Persona 3 finale was absolutely amazing, but that doesn't undo how bored I was for at least half of the 60-hour game. The small moments of life and the charm of Inaba really doesn't have enough to last 70+ hours for me. The Phantom Thieves are cool and they have some entertaining stories, but the world and daily life leaves much to be desired. These games don't have what I like most in JRPGs, and in its place is something that I feel is pretty basic, but it gets stretched out way too long. The parts I do like are often presented in an artificial way, and the gameplay loop feels way too structured to feel real. I still have some more Persona games to try out though, including some spin-offs, and I may have come off really negative, but I do think the series is at least good enough for me to want to play some earlier Persona games as well as Persona 3 Reload, and eventually Persona 6. I hope that in the eventual next game, they'll expand on the things you can do and the stories that can happen in the regular world. Maybe then this series can finally break free from being good to great. Thank you guys for watching, and I encourage you guys to let me know your thoughts on the Persona series, and especially if you do like it, like tell me why, you know, or even compared to other JRPGs, why it shines, and why you would say, you know, the real charm of the series is. Anyway, that's all I got. I'll be seeing you guys next time.